Welcome to episode 106 of Gods and Heroes of Ancient Greece. My name is MyLinda Butterworth, and today we continue with the tales of Troy and part 2 of the story of Memnon. The next morning, Eos rose in the sky reluctantly, for she too had heard the words of Zeus and divined the fate in store for her son. Memnon had wakened early. The stars were just paling when he shook sleep, his last one on earth, from his lashes and leaped from his couch, impatient to fight the Argives, Trojans, and Ethiopians, girt on their armor, and like a train of dark clouds driven by the wind, the battalion streamed out of the gates and into the field. The whole world was jammed with a moving throng, and their feet stirred up the dust. The Acheans saw them coming and were amazed. In great haste, they too seized their weapons and came forward from the ships, Achilles, in whom they placed their trust, in the center. Erect and proud he stood in his chariot, like the thunderbolt in the hand of Zeus. But in the middle of the Trojan army, no less proud and menacing than Achilles, came Memnon, and he resembled Ares himself. Round about him were his many men, and all of them obedient to his word and eager to begin the fight. The hosts were like two seas which rolled toward each other and clashed wave on wave. Swords hissed through the air, spears whirred, and battle cries mingled with the moans of the dying. Trojan after Trojan fell from the throats of Achilles, who raged like a tempest which tears up trees by roots and topples houses and walls. But Memnon also sowed destruction among the Acheans. He slew 2 comrades in arms of Nestor, and now he was close to the old man from Pylos himself, and would have slain him, for one of his horses had been wounded by an arrow from the bow of Paris. This slowed the chariot just as Memnon came running with lifted lance. In alarm, Nestor called to his son Antilichus, and his cry was heard. Quickly, Antilichus placed himself in front of his father, and cast his spear at the Ethiopian. He sprang to one side, and the missile hit Ethiops, his friend, the son of Paris. At that, Memnon rushed at Antilichus like a lion at a boar. The youth hurled a stone at his assailant, but it bounded back from his helmet. And now Memnon's lance pierced him to the heart, and Antilichus bought his father's rescue at the cost of his own life. When the Acheans saw him fall, they were deeply distressed, but his father grieved most bitterly because it was for his sake that his son had been killed before his very eyes. But he had enough presence of mind to call Thrasymedes, one of his other sons, to drive the murderer away from his brother's body. Above the din of battle he heard the call, and Pharis went with him. Memnon was so sure of himself that he let them come quite close. All the spears they hurled at him flew past his armor, on which his mother Eos had laid a spell. They did indeed reach a target, but never that at which they were aimed. While they were striking down other enemy warriors, Memnon began to strip Antilichus of his armor, and the Argives circled their slain companion just as howling jackals prowl above the stag which the lion is tearing. When Nestor saw that their effort were in vain, he groaned aloud, called to other friends, and even dismounted from his chariot in a desperate attempt to save the body of his son. But when Memnon saw him, he met him reverently, as though he were his own father. "Old man," he said, "for me to fight you would not be fitting. From a distance I took you for a young warrior, and that is why I aimed my lance at you. Now that I see you are far older than I thought, leave the battlefield, for my heart rebels against striking you down into the dust beside your son. As for you, men would call you a fool for daring so unequal a combat." But Nestor replied, "What you have just said, Memnon, is untrue. No one in the world would say fool to a man who fights for the body of his son, who tries to drive the cruel slayer from it. Oh, had you only known me when I was young! Now, to be sure, I am like an old lion, which even dog can keep from the herd. but you will see that I can still hold my own with many a man, that my old age forces me to yield only to the hardiest." Thus said Nestor, and retreated, leaving his son on the ground. Thermosmedes and Phares went with him. And now Memnon and his Ethiopians forged ahead unhindered, and the Argives fled before their thrust. Nestor turned to Achilles. "Protector of the Argives," he addressed him, "see, there lies my son dead. Memnon has taken his weapons. Soon the dogs will tear his flesh. Come and help, for the only true friend is he who defends the body of his slain comrade." Achilles listened intently, and profound sadness weighed his spirit when he saw the Ethiopians felling the Danai in droves. Up to this moment, the son of Peleus had been fighting the Trojans. Many of them he had slain. Now he abandoned them and turned his attention to Memnon alone. When the son of Eos saw him coming, he grasped a huge stone and flung it at the shield of his foe. But the stone rebounded, and Achilles, who had left his chariot behind the lines, had at Memnon on foot and wounded his right shoulder with his spear. The Ethiopian ignored the thrust and ran forward and lunged at Achilles with his mighty lance. It struck the hero's arm, and the blood flowed from the wound. At that, Memnon exulted and cried, "You wretch! You slew the Trojans without mercy, but now you are face to face with the son of a goddess, with a foe you are not equal to. For Eos, my mother, who dwells on Olympus, is more powerful than Thetis, your mother, who lives in the sea with the fish and monsters." But Achilles only smiled and said, "The outcome will show which of us is descended from better parents. For now, I shall avenge the death of young Antilichus, as I once took vengeance on Hector for the death of Patroclus, my friend." With that, he gripped his long spear in both hands, and Memnon did same with his. They rushed at each other, and Zeus made them taller and stronger and more tireless than ordinary mortals, so that neither could down the other. They came so close that the crests of their helmets touched. In vain they tried to wound each other above the greaves or below the cuirass. Their armor clanged. Ethiopians, Trojans, and Argives sounded their battle cries to heaven. The dust danced under their feet, and while their leaders fought, the men too flung about in fierce battle. The Olympians watched from their lofty lookout and took pleasure in the undecided struggle. Some rejoiced in the strength of the son of Peleus, other in Memnon's steadfast resistance, according to whether they were friends or kinsmen of one or the other of the two heroes. And a quarrel would have broken out among the gods had not Zeus summoned two of the Fates and ordered the dark goddess to go to Memnon, the shining one to Achilles. At this command, loud cries rang out on Olympus, cries of delight and of despair. But the two fought on, unaware of the presence of the goddess of fate. They used swords, lances, and stones. Neither yielded. Both stood solid as rock, and the combat of their men was just as stubborn. Blood and sweat streamed from their bodies, and the earth was littered with the slain. But in the end, the fates swayed the issue. Achilles thrust his lance into Memnon's breast, thrust so deeply that the point came out at its back, and he crashed to the ground in a pool of blood. And now the Trojans fled, and Achilles pursued them like a tempest, while his friends stripped his fallen foe of his arms. Up in heaven, Eos uttered a mournful sigh. She veiled herself in heavy cloud, and the earth was covered with darkness. At her command, her children, the winds, flew down to the field, seized the body of her son, and under the hands of his enemies, and bore it away through the air. All that was left of him on earth were the drops of blood, which fell from him as he was carried through space. These merged to a crimson river, which every year, on the day of Memnon's death, lapped the base of Mount Ida, and flowed through the plain with a stench of decay. The winds carried their burden low over the earth, and the Ethiopians who could not bear to part from the dead king followed along the ground, groaning with sorrow, until the corpse vanished from the sight of both Trojans and Argives. The wind set it down on the bank of the Aesepus, and the lovely daughters of the river god prepared the burial place in a quiet grove. Then Eos descended from heaven, and she and the nymphs buried Memnon and heaped the mound, weeping and sighing. The Trojans, who had returned to their city, also mourned the Ethiopian king with true sorrow. Even the Argives could not take unalloyed pleasure at their victory. They praised Achilles for his prowess and called him the pride of their host. But they wept with Nestor for his dear son Antilichus. And so that night the battlefield resounded with cries of triumph and grief. And here is where I end my tale for today. But I'll be back with more tales, many more tales. Until then, my friends, enjoy the journey.